Joining me today is Alexey Guzey. He is a blogger, and most recently, he co founded an organization called New Science, seeking to create scientific institutions outside of the um, traditional academia system. Um, Alexey, welcome to the show. How's it going?
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Uh, is that would you say a good way of describing what you do? Would you sort of add to that a little bit?
Um, yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't start the description of myself with a blogger. I sort of see writing as a secondary thing, as like the thing that I do and the thing that I hope is useful and interesting to people. But yeah, I've been. I mean, since I finished university, I've been like thinking about the structures of scientific institutions, and um, yeah, finally, I now recently started the uh, non-profit New Science, uh, and uh, yeah, so I think the way I would describe myself as probably like a researcher or as a founder, and only then as a writer and as a blogger.
That makes sense. Um, I guess the first the way that I came across your
Yeah.
work and and
However,
and 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 the and
yeah,
the yeah was kind of through blog and through your writing, and your writing has been uh, like kind of an inspiration, I'd say, to I guess just to myself and I'm sure a lot of like a lot of other people are fans of it as well. But that's true. Like a lot of your posts go into I guess sort of like research directions and this thing with new science. I think, I mean, it's fair to say that it's like um, I guess the sort of the biggest and most ambitious project that you've sort of taken on
yeah.
to date. Um, but so I guess let's just to kind of give people this um, kind of grand tour of your work and sort of everything that you've been doing. When was like you talked about in when you were in college and maybe even younger, um, basically being in a way lost and not really um, having too many people to whom you could relate, and so I guess what was how did you I guess first find uh, like find your way out of that and started to meet people who share your interest and started to actually concretely identify your interests. Um, was that when you joined Twitter, or was that before you joined Twitter?
Um, I think it's, well, difficult question. I I discovered less wrong when I was in like 10th grade, and there were a lot of people who thought similarly to how I think about things. However, yeah, like I didn't quite identify with less strong, and don't think I ended up making any friends from hanging out there. And yeah, I think the first friends I made uh, who were really sharing the way I feel about life were probably, yeah, on Twitter. and came as a result of me starting to use Twitter actively somewhere in the middle of 2015, I think. And then yeah, and then like you mentioned that you first became aware of me as a result of my Why We Sleep piece. And yeah, even though I prefer to be first identified by a writer as a researcher, a funder, like the way most people are aware of me, of those who are aware of me, is via my writing, and probably pieces that are not actually directly related to the thing that I'm working on. And yeah, I think most of my friends are basically uh, they either know me because like we somehow know each other from Twitter, or because they like read my blog, or sometimes because I read their blog or read their blog and then like emailed them at some point, uh, and we started talking and became friends.
Yeah, it's funny how work you do on the internet, um, like almost randomly, well, not randomly, but the stuff that becomes viral is usually not the stuff that you'd expect to become viral. Like, I like, I'm sure you felt that, um like you put so much effort into a particular post, and it doesn't pick up that much steam, and then yet you put out some tweet that you've thought about for 5 minutes, and then it becomes like one of the most popular things on your timeline. um
Yep.
but so one of the posts you wrote is about, basically making the case for Twitter, and how people should join Twitter, how they would benefit from joining Twitter. And ever since I started being active on there about a year ago, since the pandemic, I've felt the same way, and I've basically, um, ever since, been trying to kind of convince my friends to get in on this thing as well. So I guess, like, what would your elevator pitch be for Twitter? Like, what are the, if you had to make the case for somebody joining, what would that be?
I think Twitter is a unique social network, uh, in that like probably most people who you interact with on Twitter or end up interacting with are not people who you know in real life. At least not the people who you knew from real life initially. And yeah, Twitter is, and this happens because you, well, maybe like start following people who you know personally or who you know of, but then like things get retweeted into your feed, and you can just, because you can just reply to any tweet or follow anyone, and like it turns out that like at the end of the day, the majority of people who you probably like should be friends with, you're not currently friends with. And because Twitter is like pretty good at sort of like getting you to those people, uh, and you like getting you to interact with them and to like what to become mutuals with them, as it's called on Twitter, where maybe you follow them because you find their tweets interesting, and then they check out your profile and start following you back, and then maybe over the course of months or sometimes years, you like sometimes like tweets of them that you like, and you sort of build this shared understanding of how both of you think, and then maybe. Uh, at some point you decide to share a thought you have on a tweet of some of the person you follow in their direct messages, in their DMs, as it's called on Twitter, and then you start a conversation, and then like it turns out that you like kind of known each other for a while, and then if you're in the same city, you end up meeting, and then yeah, you basically have a feeling as if you've been friends with them for like a couple of years. And this happens often to people who hang out on Twitter. And I think this is like a very good thing that this happens because of the thing that I mentioned, where the people who I just meet via college or via geographical proximity are uh, like selected for shared interests and for shared ways of thinking, much less than people who end up finding organically on Twitter. And yeah, I'm not aware of any other social network where this happens like to this extent. I guess something like this happens on like Twitter and maybe MMORPGs, where you become lifelong friends with people from your guild. But uh, yeah, I think I guess this would be my pitch for Twitter, and then I think it would be to take a very long elevator ride to someplace out, but maybe a space elevator. But
I mean, it is very uh, very unique in that way, and I guess just the internet in general gives a lot more people this ability to find people based on, like you were saying, based on interests instead of proximity or what school they go to.
right,
Um, before before I joined Twitter, I was actually kind of hoping that my university would serve this function for me, where I had this idea of a university in mind, where it's this place that you go to meet like-minded people. It was like one of the primary reasons for why I was interested in this thing. And as it turned out, it in my case, while I did meet some just like amazing people there, uh, overall it didn't turn out to be this place where it's just this um, kind of meeting of like-minded people. Um, so that's like, to me, that I find that very um, just, just very interesting, because I feel like well, before, maybe if we go back like 100 years or something, it's you, you certainly had people connecting over interests, but it seemed like if you that kind of life was only available to you if you were relatively well known, because it's like if you're relatively well known, then you um, you'd be able to basically like hang out with all of the other like relatively like well-known people in your city or state or country or whatever, right? And in that way, since everybody um, that had a little bit of fame were visible, you could do this kind of um, you know sort of outreach, and you could pick out who you would uh, want to talk to, right? But since most people um, were kind of invisible to the world, um, I like I think that kind of mode of getting to know people was only available to a very small percentage. I don't know if like if you've kind of thought about it in those terms at all, um, but that's, yeah, I don't know. I guess I just find that kind of interesting. Um, but the I guess the other thing that this kind of ties into is just this whole idea of uh, kind of a recurring theme in the stuff that you write is just like how to make friends, for example. And like one of the I guess pieces of advice that you give is basically how to do uh, like outreach to people, and how you should generally be more I guess um, aggressive when it comes to just cold emailing people, uh, cold messaging people. Can you elaborate on that and sort of like explain how one would do this? Why wouldn't one would do this?
Right. Um, yeah, I mean, I guess I kind of uh, illustrated how this happens naturally on Twitter. Uh, but yeah, I guess like cold emails specifically, people underappreciate the fact that you can, turns out that you can email pretty much anyone. And like nobody guarantees that they're going to respond, but it turns out that if you email like 10 people, maybe who you think are interesting, like email them, like not send them like a spam email that you just copy to 10 people, but like if you find the work of someone interesting and you write a thoughtful email to them, and maybe uh, share something of your work, or ask them a question about their work perhaps, or I guess like in general try to send them an email that they will find interesting, and then do this for like 10 people. At least a couple will probably reply, and then uh, they might turn into uh, this email might turn into a conversation, and then if it turns into a conversation, then uh, you can basically then like continue the conversation indefinitely, or start another conversation, and sort of just become friends with people, or get to know people, or maybe propose to have a Zoom call, uh, e- and uh, yeah, talk to the person. uh, and feel like I send like still send a lot of cold emails, and they are still very valuable. Like I try to talk to scientists a lot, and often I find scientists' work interesting, and I let them know about it, and I explain what I do, and I ask them if they'd be interested in talking to me about their work and about the work that I do, about my thinking about the structures of scientific institutions. And it turns out that like some fraction of them are interested in my work, and would like to talk to me, essentially. And with some fraction of people I talk to, it turns out that we enjoy talking a lot, and we sort of continue talking, and sometimes become friends. Um, so yeah, I feel like the yeah, like doing this is pretty underappreciated. Like the fact that you can just email people who you think are interesting and try to talk to them.
Why do you think that most people don't do that? Do they just not? Well, like I guess, do you think it's just the thought that well, these people are very busy, they're probably not going to get back to
Yeah,
me, or is it?
I think there are a couple of reasons. First of all, it's just a very unnatural thing to do. I think, to like send an email to someone you don't know. Mm, It's yeah, I don't know. It seems like like if you've never done this, it just feels kind of weird to even try to do this. Like like it's kind of rude even perhaps to like why would I send an email to a person? Like you would not call on a phone a person who you never talked to, right? That would be just like creepy. And yeah, I think it's easy to feel this way about email, even though like if you think about this for a few seconds, like you would like personally would probably be happy to like receive an email from someone you don't know that they enjoy your work, or that they're interested in the things that you do. Uh, but yeah, I do feel that this is a real barrier. Then yeah, there's the feeling that I know I definitely had the feeling when I was younger that um, I guess people whose work I enjoy must be busy, and they must not have the time to reply to my emails and to talk to me. And like sometimes it's true, sometimes that's not true. If you email Jeff Bezos, he will probably not reply. But it's kind of surprising that, even people who one would think are famous, like, check their email. And well, if they're inundated with email, they might like check it once a day and like randomly click on whatever pops up on their screen. But like sometimes they randomly click on your email, or maybe on the like email, and like, you can increase your chances of that happening by sending a couple of follow-ups. But it turns out that like most people just like read their email, uh, uh, yeah, and are willing to talk to people who seem interesting. uh, so this is another thing. Then I think like the I sort of got conditioned to the fact that people don't reply to cold emails, and uh, I am like I no longer, well, I guess I feel it a little bit, but I like when you first start like send a cold email, you like feel really really anxious about it. You're like, well, what if they don't reply? And then they don't and maybe like they don't indeed don't reply, because like at the end of the day, like people will not reply to most of your cold emails, because like you will probably not seem interesting to most people who you think are interesting. uh, that's I guess a pretty sad fact, but this is like the case for me, I think, and for people who I try to talk to. But yeah, like at the end of the day, it does just require like making sure you like overcome. Uh, it definitely was for me that I had to overcome a lot of anxiety to just like press the send button, to face this risk of maybe the person like never replies to you, and then you feel terrible. uh, yeah, I think this is probably like one of the things that like stops people the most. uh, yeah, so this is the three reasons. I think I had something else but I'm forgetting it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think like at the end of the day there are like a lot of like this like barriers, psychological barriers, that make it like naturally difficult to send cold emails, and so most people just don't do that, or don't do that as often as they should.
Yeah, it's like we make certain assumptions about life and the way that the world works, and we put artificial barriers on ourselves about what we can or can't do, what seems like realistic or normal. If a lot of people are doing it, then it probably works. If nobody's doing it, I think it's very easy to get into this um, frame of mind. Or if you haven't heard of anyone doing something that it like there must be a good reason for it. And I mean, sometimes there is, but that's not something that I think you should rely on too much. Um, in the case of well, just like when you were talking about most people checking their emails and replying to their emails, um, I have like heard like this particular anecdote that, for example, Noam Chomsky replies to, I think, like most of the emails that he gets. So if you send an email to Noam Chomsky, you'll probably get a response. Um, and it's like people like emailing Noam Chomsky is not something that people just kind of think about on the regular, but that's something you can totally do. Um,
Yeah, I once emailed a Nobel. I was writing my bachelor's thesis in economics, and I was like looking for a reference, or like I couldn't find a paper, and I emailed like Nobel laureate in economics, asking him for a paper, and he just like pointed, and like he like replied a few minutes later and was like, "Here's the paper," like that it wasn't available public, or like it was difficult to find public. He just replied,
mm,
and it was helpful, and yeah, it turns out you can just do that.
yeah. Well, but it also kind of ties into, I guess, just this general approach to life where you just assume that um, like it's kind of a more active approach to life, where you can just like assume that sort of life is this malleable thing, and that you can kind of act on it and you can change it. I mean, there's that famous Steve Jobs quote that touches on a lot of
Yep.
these kinds of things, and I find that's you know like that's a good heuristic. Well, like whether or not that's true in all cases, it's probably better to approach it with a kind of perspective that will actually, if you pursue something, then sort of you can get it. If you want to talk to a particular person, for example, you should just go out and try to talk to them, right? But
Yeah.
yeah. um and 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 so I guess the other thing, well, it's one thing to kind of find friends and find this community of people who share your interests, and this kind of this tribe, I guess. uh, but it's another to actually figure out what your interests are, and like what is it that you want to dedicate large portion of your life to. So the other thing that I was curious about is like how what the process of that was like. How did you yeah, just I guess like tell me the story of how like how you searched for the thing that you're passionate about, and kind of like what yeah, like how did you look for your interests, um how did you approach that, what did you learn along the way?
Right. Uh, yeah, I guess that's uh, also a difficult question. I think I like at the most fundamental level. I feel like I spent a lot of years trying to trying very hard to figure out what I really want to do, and uh, it started with me uh, yeah, I think back in high school I wanted to be like a physicist and do physical cosmology, and I wanted to study at Caltech. And then I realized at some point that I'm not getting into Caltech because I have like no impressive curriculars, extracurriculars, and well, uh, and I'm definitely not winning any speaking competitions, and I was not definitely winning any speaking competitions. But yeah, and also I had very low GPA, and then I think I like decided that, well, maybe I should do software engineering, and then I ended up and decided that I should study math at the university, and then I didn't get into the program that I wanted to get into at Moscow State University. Uh, because I was like depressed in high school and spent most of my time playing video games, and then like basically accidentally ended up studying economics and entering the program in economics. And then I decided that okay, like I started to get interested in economics, and spent a while actually trying to get jobs in like banks and in consulting, and ended up not getting a single internship in a bank or in consulting, which is pretty funny. And uh, at some point, hmm? You look like you have a question.
No, I was just curious, like, like, how does one, I guess, like, accidentally get into economics?
Right.
Was
Oh
it, was it,
yes.
was it, was it, was it like a just trying out random things.
Yeah. Okay. So what happened was that at the end of high school, I was like really depressed, and like at some point in my final year of high school, I literally stopped going to school and just decided that
Mm.
it's just like no point, and I just like spent I think a couple of months just like playing video games, like not going to school, like refusing to like talk to my parents about this, and at some point they got a call from like the school principal, and the school principal told my parents that they're not going to let me take the state exams required to enter university at the end of high school. And then like my parents, I don't remember, I think like I agreed to like go to high school and read books there and not really do anything. And yeah, so I did that, and I did pretty poorly on my state exams as a result. And then I was like not feeling again, like not feeling like there's any point in life. And I thought that, well, I was 16 at the time, and I thought that I did not enter Caltech. I did not do
Might as well just
anything
give up at that
impressive.
point.
I did not yeah, I did not do anything impressive in my life, and that I did not study math in high school. I did not learn how to code in high school, and yeah, basically felt that I like that's it. My life has peaked, and that there's like no point in doing anything, and basically like did not want to enter university, and my plan was to just like continue playing video games indefinitely. And what happened was that my mom just like kept nagging me about like applying to university, and at some point I decided to, I think, just like play a joke on her or something. And I figured, okay, like I told her, okay, I'm going to apply to like exactly one university, and I decided to apply to the university which I was like pretty sure does not actually want me, because this is like one of the best universities in Moscow. And I thought that, yeah, like definitely do not want someone with my test scores. And then I like started exploring their programs, and it turned out that they had like one program in economics that had exactly like the cutoff for test scores at exactly the like the number of points that I got at like 230 out of 300. And I just like decided, okay, why not? Uh, and ended up signing up for it, and uh, yeah, it ended up, yeah. And then in Russia, because like in the US, you like enter the university and then you take whatever courses and then declare your major like the second or your third year. And in Russia, you enter one specific program, and uh, so I entered the program in economics, uh, basically. That's how I ended up accidentally studying economics.
Gotcha.
Um, yeah, and then it turned out that economics was okay, and it was like, I guess, uh, the amount of math I was studying was basically the amount I actually wanted to study, as I realized. And I think in retrospect, I was very lucky that I did not enter the math program at Moscow State University, because I probably would have been kicked out, because I think they're like, from talking to people who actually went there around the same time that I did, like the atmosphere at Moscow State University is just like way worse at the university that I ended up going to, the Higher School of Economics.
It's just
And
really competitive, or
it's like more so like Higher School of Economics is a new university. It was founded in like right after the dissolution of USSR. It was intended to be different, and Moscow State, like this oldest university in Russia,
hmm,
and their like mathematics faculty especially is, my understanding is that they're very conservative, and you don't get a lot of choice in what you do, and you just like spend a lot of time doing like ridiculous shit, like integrating really really hard integrals and solving like differential equations that are like pointless, but they that like are intended to harden you or something. And also, yeah, I don't know, I think I like don't like math enough uh to 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 like spend 4 years just doing like doing really complex mathematics. And I like bad at forcing myself to do things that I'm not very interested in, which actually resulted in me like almost failing to graduate from my program. Like I ended up like being very like I was I think I was like so surprised by the fact that I actually like entered the university that I entered, that I uh, ended up mm, mm, yeah, getting pretty excited for university actually, and I finished my first year having very good grades, and then I became like progressively less interested in economics, and my and like in my final year, in my first year I ended up getting after my first year, I ended up getting, if I remember correctly, like 75% like merit based discount on the cost of education.
Hmm.
And for my last year, I almost like completely lost it. And like actually, at the end of my last year, I failed a couple of like exams. And like at some point, I thought that I would not get a diploma. And then it turned out that like I ended up getting it, but like just barely, and it was uh, yeah, pretty funny.
That's
But
yeah. That's a story that's like very familiar to me as somebody who's gone through that. Well, I guess majority of that university system where you look at all the first years that come into the university, and they're all super excited to be there. They're gonna go on, and sort of they're like enthusiastic to study all this stuff, and then by the time you get to fourth year, you just like look at people, and that sort of shine in their eyes is for the most part gone, and they're all just burnt out.
yeah,
Which, yeah, I guess just is
yeah,
the way of things.
in my program, like I think most people I knew were like just working full time in their final year of university.
Mm.
Basically, they were going to the university just like uh, they were like just trying to get the diploma, and did not care at all about it, and they were like working in consulting or in finance, or like starting their own businesses already. Uh, yeah, but I think I get distracted from the question of how I arrived at the thing that I'm doing now. And yeah, so like I ended up studying economics, and economics was fairly interesting for some time. But uh, yeah, so I guess I what happened was that in my first year, I actually realized that maybe what I should do is I should try to become the uh, minister of the economic development of Russia or something like that, and that I should like try to really like figure out how to make the economic policy of Russia better, and hopefully to like help a lot of people in this way, and to help like progress and well-being, and uh, I ended up cold emailing an organization that
There you go.
did analysis, like economic analysis mostly, for the Russian government, and getting an internship there in my second year of university, which was uh, pretty interesting. And then I ended up actually interning in the Russian government after my second year of university, uh, and also like doing uh, economics related stuff, and that uh, was not fun at all. And after I actually interned in the Russian government, I think it was a really weird experience. The people who I worked with were actually like smart and motivated, and like tried to do something, and uh, at the same time it seemed that like the organization at large is just like really bad at doing things that make sense, or and that you basically don't get rewarded for doing the right thing, and that uh, yeah, it was I don't know, a very difficult experience to witness it from the inside. And I feel like the realization that I got was that, yeah, I'll probably like the odds of me advancing through the ranks, like conditional of me like working hard and trying to do things that would make sense, are not that good, and that it would just be really really difficult thing to do. And also, actually, around the same time, the Russian Minister of Economic Development was getting uh, accused of corruption, and he had a criminal investigation open into him uh, by like a Russian state-owned oil company. And like the impression that I got was that, also I don't know what really happened. Like I guess nobody knows, but the impression that I got was that he was actually trying to do something good, and he was like trying to prevent corruption. But then like he ended up getting accused of corruption, because like this is what can happen to you in Russia
Right,
when you
right,
try
right.
to prevent corruption from happening. And like this was definitely not very encouraging to me when I was thinking about like whether I should like try to uh, land into that role, and like
It
probably
doesn't seem very
like
good
do
for your
something
health to
about
be
corruption as well.
the
Hmm?
economic minister. You're just saying, like, doesn't seem to be very good for your health to be the economic minister of Russia, or
Yeah,
whatever,
and
to
in the same way
have
that
any
it
of
doesn't,
those high
it's
up.
not very good for your health to be like a billionaire in China. And, like it's not very good for your health to
Pretty
like
much,
try to fight corruption in Russia,
pretty
basically.
much, pretty much. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, so that was a pretty bad experience. And basically after that internship I decided that, yeah, like I don't want to work for the government of Russia, and I basically like decided I don't want to stay in Russia at all, and I became like sort of very pessimistic on like things like becoming better in Russia, because it seemed that there is this like Goliath that like the Goliath of the government, but also I don't know, like the entire thing basically seemed like, mm, it kind of seemed impossible to really change the long-term trajectory.
Hmm.
Also, around the same time, I guess I was like reading quite a lot of economic history, and like one of the things in economic history, mm, uh, you notice is that the countries sort of have like their long-term trajectories of growth and development, and like some countries, like European countries for example, like if you look at them like 2000 years ago they were like ahead, and they were like in the Middle Ages, like even though they can see like even like in the Dark Ages, like Europe was still kind of ahead. And then like 500 years ago Europe was still ahead, and like today Europe is still ahead. And the same, yeah, for like the United States, they were like pretty much since their founding were like ahead. And then you look at other countries, and they're like basically as far back as you go, they were not ahead. They were like trying to catch up, and like sometimes catching up for brief periods of time, but then like failing to sustain that. And uh, I feel like this has been like the case for Russia, where there have been like there were a lot of really smart people who tried to change the long-term trajectory of Russia. Like when I was reading the history of Russia, I was like surprised at how like smart like like a lot of Russian emperors, for example, seemed. Like they seemed extremely sensible, and they were like these like people who were like, yeah, Russia seems to have like problem with corruption and with like lack of economic development, and like we should do something about that. And like they were like sensible in even the way they tried to go about it. And this is like the case for like, I think, starting from uh, probably from Peter the Great in 18th century, where he was the first person who tried to westernize Russia. Like he kind of did it. And then there was Catherine II, and then I think Alexander the First and Alexander the Second, and I'm probably forgetting other people who seemed pretty sense. Well, I don't know how sensible Peter the Great. Well, he was not super sensible, but like Alexander the First and Alexander the Second in particular seemed like very sensible. And like Alexander the Second actually like ended up, he abolished the uh, uh, I'm forgetting what it's called, but like the Russian analog of slavery, where the peasants, they were not formally owned by anyone, but like they couldn't freely like change where they worked, and like he like gave them basically a lot of freedom, and he like tried to liberalize a lot of things, and
Hmm.
he was like actually like was trying to create the first Russian constitution in the middle of 19th century, and he like ended up killed by terrorists because they were like their reasoning like was literally, wait, like this emperor is trying to do good things, we should kill him as quick as we can because then people will realize that emperors are not actually really that bad. And he ended up getting killed, like I think like 2 days before he was going to sign the first Russian constitution,
Yeah.
basically. So yeah, and then yeah, so I think at the end of the day, I sort of became pessimistic on trying to change the long-term trajectory of a country uh, in this way, like, and it does seem that I don't know. So right now I'm thinking about about science, for example, and like I want to create better scientific institutions, and it does seem that like I can create or help to create better institutions of science that will cause more good science to happen, and that will like speed things up in a good direction somewhat, uh, and maybe it will have some sort of a long-term effect. But when thinking about uh, yeah, but when thinking about Russia, I and specifically like changing the economy of Russia, basically, yeah, it did not really seem to make sense.
What
Uh,
makes you think that you can have a bigger impact on the structures of science and improving the institutions around science than you can with something like economics? Um,
um, yeah, good question.
in some ways, for someone looking at these things from the outside, they might seem like both like these very big kind of like problems that you can't really sort of
Right. I
move
think
quickly.
I think the difference here is that I sort of stopped. Actually, sort of stopped reasoning about the thing that I do in a way that like it will have this long-term effects on some like global trajectory of stuff, because like the thing that motivates me to work on science and to work on the institutions of science, I feel like uh, in a big way it is like kind of selfishly driven. Like I feel like, well, first of all, I'm actually a lot more interested in science than I'm interested in economics, and I've like I I enjoy thinking about science and I enjoy learning about science a lot more. And I spent a lot more. Well, I guess I wanted to be a physicist when I was like in high school, and like science is just like inherently more interesting to me. And I there, but also the other part of it is that like so I'm focused on biology specifically, and I want to like help to create more good biology research. And here I think it that like it would be good for the world, uh, even if it will not change like the long-term trajectory of humanity. It will like make things happen faster, or uh, somewhat. But also, like, if I'm thinking about myself, I'm like aging, and I do not want to age that much. And even if, and like I want to like do to see us like do cool shit with biology that we're probably going to be able to do at some point in the future. And even if my work does not end up changing the like trajectory of humanity critically, maybe it will cause like some cool shit happen with science and with biology like 10 or 20 years earlier, and I will
Hmm.
personally witness it, and I will personally benefit from it. And uh, I think this was not the case with like working on uh, working on economic development. But the other thing is that in the case of Russia is like, yeah, it basically like literally did not seem like I can get into a high enough position to be to even like to meaningfully change affect even like the short term dynamics of things, to be honest. Like I see people in fairly high positions in power in Russia, and they like actually don't really have any power. Like there's like the what's called the president of Russia, but and like he has a lot of power, and he can just like go and fuck shit up, and
Hmm.
you'll like spend most of your time just like unfucking shit, and you'll probably fail because he'll just be and he and maybe other like like top people in the government will like be fucking shit up faster than uh, you're going to be able to unfuck them. And also, like the Russian state is well, like it's like not a very benevolent state on Earth. Let's put it that way. And it's like again from the mm, I don't know, from like the ethical point of view, I guess like there is an argument to be made for working from within a system that's not benevolent and like trying to make it more benevolent. But it's not a thing that I personally would want to do, I feel like. And yeah, and because like for example I guess I gave the example of this like dude who got accused of corruption, where it seemed that he was like trying to actually decrease the amount of corruption. And I like in the sense, again, like the thing that I'm doing right now is very different in the sense that I'm starting nonprofit, and I'm starting nonprofit in the US. And like nobody, like the person who will be able to stop me is myself. Is like if I do stuff wrong, I'm like going to fail. But like there is not going to like be like a government that will try to stamp on me and to just destroy whatever I'm working on. And there at the end of the day, like I'm in like yeah, it will depend on me whether like the thing that I do fails or succeeds. And uh, it does seem to me that, well, if I try very hard and try to think about things very well, there is a meaningful chance that I'm going to do something interesting with my nonprofit.
Yeah, and that's I think a very crucial distinction is whether you choose to whenever you want to improve a system, whether you choose to work from inside the system or from outside the system. And it seems that, at least with everything that I've seen, it's often much easier to um, work outside the system and try to come up with an improvement that way.
Yeah,
Like for example, if you know, it's easier to create a startup and to scale a startup than to go into some kind of bureaucratic organization and try to reform it and get it up to the quality of like an equivalent startup, right? Or
right.
same with
Yeah, yeah, and
academia,
this is
like I'm sure. if you went into kind of like U.S. academia and try to actually you know change the structures of science from within it, it would have been a much harder task.
Yeah, right. And this is basically like exactly what happened to me was that so like I realized that uh, I don't want to do anything to do with Russia basically, and I decided that I want to basically like leave as soon as I can and like not think about Russia, and uh, 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 uh,
That seems like a very radical decision. That must have been a very uh, like I guess intense experience for you, like working
yeah,
at the
yeah. It was
yeah.
I was like extreme. I was like really inspired to do something good in Russia and to try to like yeah. Uh, and it was very difficult to realize that I probably not much I can do, and that I probably should like not try to do that. And um, I know, but now I feel good about that.
Mm.
I think I sort of stopped thinking about. I mean, I was born in Russia, and but I think I stopped thinking about Russia as my country. Basically, I now think as well. I think about myself as a Russian, but I no longer feel like I think I no longer feel responsibility for the country. Basically, I no longer feel that I should try to do something about it, and I sort of accepted that Russia is probably just going to be like this, like kind of sort of shitty state with that's like going to do shitty things to the rest of the world, and that's going to be shitty to its citizens, and that uh, there's that's probably just like how it's going to be. And I think basically accepted that. And then on the other hand, well, the United States seem to me as a Russian like the land of opportunity, and which is kind of cheesy, but I don't think that people who live in the US underappreciate just how true that is for people from the outside of the US, like just how functional the like I feel like Americans, like my friends, like to talk about like how dysfunctional things in the US are, but like they have not seen the rest of the world, or like they have not lived in other countries to realize just how incredible like the rule of the law is in the US, that there really is like like you can basically do things and not be afraid that they're going to be randomly destroyed by like the state or just some like random powers, and that uh yeah but anyways
That's certainly
so
very helpful when you're trying to. I mean, like I can think of a few cases where if you try to do something in the states, it might get destroyed. But certainly, the those things kind of exist on the margins, and most of the space is kind of wide open. Whereas I'd imagine in a place like Russia, um, there's maybe like a tiny space that's wide open, and but
yeah
anything that
yeah I
touches
mean
anything
I'm
related to the government is
yeah
like off limits.
basically like I'm not trying to idealize the United States, and like there do definitely some cases where like um it's like some institutions uh, do not work very well, but comparatively it's I don't know, I'm like optimistic on the US. I think I'm optimistic on Israel, and I don't know,
Hmm.
this is like the two countries in the world that I'm optimistic on, and like I'm pessimistic on Russia, uh, and yeah
Just to go on a bit of a tangent, because like what what you're talking about with Russia, I mean, like I can relate to that quite a bit because I'm basically, I guess, in the same boat when it comes to the way that I think about Russia. Um, where, I mean, I'm kind of torn because on the one hand, I like Russian culture a lot, and I think like Russian culture has produced a lot of great art, and the just the whole sort of like the Russian vibe to me feels a lot closer to home than the Western vibe in a lot of ways. Like there's a
Yeah,
kind of um, uh, like people don't like to me it feels like people are more authentic in Russian culture in a way because it's like when somebody smiles, for example, you know that the smile is kind of like because they're actually happy. Whereas, for example, in the West, it's more of a kind of like like everybody smiles at everybody, and so you're and everybody's polite to everybody, and so that's on the one hand that's nice on the surface level, but you kind of get into this situations like, well, is this person really happy? Is like and so I guess that there are things like this where that make me actually appreciate Russian culture a lot. But like you mentioned, I don't care for the Russian government, and I don't really see any like even if you look at for example the Soviet Union, at least there was this kind of competition between the Soviet Union and the States, and that actually led to a lot of pretty interesting innovation to come out of the Soviet Union, at least in terms of like the hard sciences, right? But now it doesn't even seem like that's really the case. Like nobody's dying to go to Russia to work on engineering, right?
yep.
And so, and in addition to that, you have this kind of corrupt government. And so I guess I wonder if and like if I was in Russia today, I'd probably do the exact same thing that you're doing, and just like move out, and try to make a life elsewhere. So I wonder, but I wonder if Russian culture can sort of survive outside of Russia. Like I feel like you need a sort of a country to be there that sort of keeps the culture, or is like the sort of the home for the culture, and and I don't know necessarily if Russia in its current state is able to be that. Have you thought about that at all? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, good question.
Is it just
Uh, yeah, I guess I do like indeed feel like people do tell me that, and I do feel Russian, and people tell me that I like think like a Russian. I think in this, I know there's this like classically Russian conception of a tragedy, of like the life as a tragedy,
Mhm.
which I vibe with a lot, and which I think like is,
Yeah.
yeah, like you know, this the I think this is sort of this Dostoevskian ideas which influenced me a lot, and also like I listen to a lot of Russian. Well, I don't really listen to old to new Russian music, I think, but I do listen to a lot of like Russian music from like uh, late 2000s and like early 2010s when I was a teenager, and it's like deeply influential for me. And I do not know whether like my children will get any of that, and I'm kind of sad about that. Where like I will probably not be able to share like my favorite Russian songs with them, and I like will probably not understand them, uh, in like why I like them that much. And also, of course, like if I'm going to be in the US, then like it's probably going to be difficult to teach children Russian, or like because like even if you speak Russian in at home, then like that's still probably not enough practice to like actually learn Russian well. And if kind of said that uh, my children probably not be able to like read Dostoevsky in Russian, for example, because it does feel like it's been important for me. And yeah, like then there's no, fewer people who can create Russian culture and who can like move it forward. And then like uh, and the same, yeah. So yes, it is like it does seem very difficult, and
It's a
there's
very pessimistic sort of look right now as
yeah
to like just like how things are looking like
yeah
for the culture.
it is. I do feel sad about that. But I'm not sure whether I would say it's pessimistic because like I was born in Russia and like I lived all my life in Russia except for like the last 2 months. But I at this so I feel very deep like nostalgia for this stuff, and at the same time like yeah, people who are born in the US, like they're not going to like do Russian culture. They're going to but they're going to create some new culture, and they're going to create some new cultural artifacts, and like they're going to be in English. But in the United States, there's I think such an incredible variety of like cultures and subcultures, and there is such yeah. I don't know. I sort of don't like. I guess like even if the Russian culture becomes poorer, I don't know whether in some global sense of even like the number of distinct cultures, whether it will decrease, or whether like the thing that would have been Russian culture would not be like substituted, like whether some other things that is as interesting or maybe more interesting will not get created instead, and maybe it's actually good. Uh, uh, yeah,
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you have, for example, dead languages that nobody speaks anymore. You have species of animal that are extinct, and so it to some extent, I mean, like nothing lasts forever, but I guess at the same time, it's hard not to yeah feel like I guess nostalgic and melancholic about that. And
yeah,
yeah, it seems like if you're in Russia right now, I mean, like the best thing you can do is just like wait for like the next regime or something. Which
yeah.
like who knows like
Although
when that would happen.
yeah, although I guess my take is that like the current regime is bad, and then like the next regime is honestly, I don't think it's likely that it's going to be massively better, and that is going to
If you look at the trend, it's certainly not been
yeah
great for the past.
yeah. So I basically decided after after this internship, after my second year of university, I decided that I don't want to do anything with Russia. And the next step was that they decided, well, maybe I should like work on global economic development, and maybe I should go work at like the World Bank, for example, and figure out how to help developing countries uh, develop. And then like also like it actually did not last that long, because again like the economic history thing about the long-term trajectories, and it was basically like yeah, it doesn't seem that the long-term trajectories are probably going to be affected here as well, and like there is no reason for why this would be different from Russia, really, and that uh, I might be able to do something good uh, in the short term. But then again, like there's this thing about like in Russia, if you really want like if you really want to improve the institutions of Russia, you have to like sort of work with the government. And then with the global development, it also seemed to me at the time that you sort of have to like work at this like big international organization, and uh, that like promotes global development, and it just yeah basically did not seem to be like a much better opportunity than like working for the government of Russia, because they also I think like seemed like very ineffective and not clear how benevolent. And also I read that book called uh, backstabbing for beginners around the time that I was thinking about that, written by a dude who worked I think at the United Nations on like some eh, project related to like helping the economics of Iraq, I think. And he just like again he like went there very idealistic, and then came out a couple of years later like having seen just like incredible amounts of corruption, just like terrible things, and like got completely disillusioned. And I think that affected me quite a bit.
Hmm.
And yeah, so I basically stopped thinking about global economic development as well, because it seemed that there's like not much you can do there. And then I was like thinking for a while about like mechanism design and stuff, because I figured, well, like there are like poor structures and poor incentives in these organizations. Maybe like we should do better mechanism design and develop better structures and incentives for stuff. And then it also yeah, I feel like I basically became convinced that like politics matters much more than I guess economics, and that like you can come up with any like mechanism, incentive structure, like mechanism as an economist, and like politicians at the end of the day will decide like what to actually do, and they will probably just pick whatever thing justifies whatever they already believe the best. Uh, so I sort of got disillusioned with that, and then that's my third year of university. So
So
yeah,
in
I think
theory, in theory, if you wanted to improve economics, then you would really just go into politics and you would try to become a good politician instead of a good economist.
um,
Or I
I
guess like
guess although you
just for
probably
any
like
global
don't want
issue
to
or
just although you probably don't want to go like straight into politics, because like if you don't know any economics you might end up just like do like suggesting like trying to push some like policies that will end up being bad, and like it's actually like really difficult to
yeah,
figure out
yeah,
which
yeah,
policies are good and bad. um, but
yeah. No, fair enough. So, but then I
yeah.
guess what? Um, and that swayed you from going into economics and from just going into any sort of global kind of policymaking or trying to do policymaking for countries. Um, so then, like, I guess, yeah. What did you try after that, or like, so how did you come across uh, uh, science and I guess the life sciences?
Yeah. Yeah, so after that, I basically like I did not want to become like, because I'm Russian, I can like only really become like a politician in Russia, right? Or I can like represent Russia on like an international arena, and I did not want to do any of that, because I like did not want to get associated with Russia really in any way anymore. And so like doing like policy or politics was kind of out of the question. And I think what happened was that I decided that yeah, like I basically stopped thinking about economics and global development. And the thing that I started thinking about then in I think in my second half of my third year in the university was like artificial intelligence, because I've like sort of been always interested in artificial intelligence, and like intelligence and like question of how intelligence works. And I had a thing where uh, I don't remember it was present at the time. I feel like it was where but I think I like wanted to like solve StarCraft 2 for a long time, and like write a program that would like play it perfectly. Yeah, I should remember writing that down as the thing that I wanted to do at the time. And yes, I figured, okay, I should like maybe the thing that I should do is actually just like become an AI researcher and try to like help develop AGI, or something like that. But like as the first step, like try to solve StarCraft 2. And yes, I started learning machine learning, and started learning TensorFlow, and basically it like did not go that well. I uh, was not, yeah, I think like I was not very good at that, and also I think like part of it was like, yeah, parts of it were stupid, parts of it were not. But I think also like I'm just in general bad at like learning things on my own. I like get stuck all the time, and like when I read a technical, like in a university, uh, when I studied like, yeah, any like hard subject, basically I had to attend office hours basically, because otherwise I just got lost. And uh, like when I'm reading a textbook, I have like 10 questions per page, because I like, I know I'm reading a thing and I get like a model in my mind of how things work build up, and like often like this model is like not correct, and they have like 10 like predictions about how things should work, and like, they're like never answered in the textbook, and they're never answered in the lecture itself. So I have to basically go to the office hours and like talk to someone who'd be able to teach me. And when I was learning like TensorFlow, I basically like, did not know any friends who I could go and like just ask whatever stupid or not stupid questions that I had, and that made studying very difficult for me. So I know in retrospect this seems like a stupid reason, because I feel like there should have been a way to like avoid that, and like figure out how to study machine learning properly, and like deep learning properly. But yeah, I guess at the time I like was not able to figure that out. But also, uh, I like sort of, it just kind of felt wrong, but like to me, though, in that like I wanted to study like how intelligence works, and like sort of like I wanted to figure out how to create artificial intelligence, and machine learning was basically, I don't know, just felt stupid. It felt like I'm just like minimizing some like stupid cost function, or
Mm.
like support vector machines, just like, well, you figured out like a, a model, and then you like optimize the model, and in like the things that like even deep learning, it basically, you did not really see any path. Like I don't know whether that was stupid or not, but like obviously I didn't have any like real expertise in deep learning or in machine learning, but it just like didn't feel like the thing that would lead us to artificial intelligence. So like I figured that, okay, probably then I should just like study neuroscience and study how the brain works, and follow the path of deep mind, where like and try to build a neuroscience inspired artificial intelligence. Um, yeah, so I started learning neuroscience. I think that's like beginning of my fourth year of university, and then I ended up actually applying for two programs in neuroscience in Europe, and got rejected from both of them. And then at some point, actually, like at some point, I actually started reading like I think in the middle of my fourth year, started reading a textbook in neuroscience, like a couple of textbooks, and like it became really cool, really clear pretty it became clear pretty quickly that I have no idea what's going on, and that like I have like no chance of properly learning neuroscience, because I should learn some biology first, basically. And so I like found a tutor and started taking this like a couple of courses in biology, and yeah, just get completely fascinated by biology. And it seemed that biology was actually way more exciting than like anything I studied before, and that there was so much stuff going on in like biology, in various areas of biology. And also, yeah, it was pretty funny also because when I was in high school, I just like completely hated biology. It just like did not make any sense at all, and it was just like a random collection of facts, that didn't seem like they mattered at all, but some like random animals or organisms, or like some botany, or some like just like shit that didn't make sense and was not interesting. And I would have never thought that I would become interested in biology, I feel like. But then, yeah, but then it did basically seem that biology was the most interesting science, and that there are like a lot of problems, like for example, aging, that are at the end of the day like biology problems, and they're worth working on. And yeah, I think I like kind of decided that like, well, I'm going to leave the question of like intelligence and artificial intelligence to other people, basically, and that I want to focus on biology. And that and yeah, so that's how I came to life sciences, or like to biology broadly, to life sciences. And then what happened was that I think in the summer after I finished college, I was thinking about biology, and I was thinking about, okay, so what should I actually do? And I think I was realizing that I probably don't want to be a scientist myself. I think I was like reading biographies of scientists, and like I basically like did not feel like they were satisfying in some fashion. Like even for scientists who discovered like some really important shit, I like read their biographies and I was like, okay, you discovered like this really important shit, but it doesn't feel like this is the thing that I would have been satisfied, basically. And at the same time, I was reading like biographies of entrepreneurs and like people who build things, and it did feel that, I was reading the biography of Elon Musk, and I remember, oh yeah, like that feels like something that I would have been satisfied with. And also like it seems that like building a company is the thing that I would have enjoyed a lot more than actually being a scientist.
That was
So
actually that was the book that got me back into reading back in high school, and sort of uh, I guess it got me interested in reading nonfiction books. That's
wait,
pretty
which
funny.
book?
The Elon Musk book.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
his biography. Well, I read his biography a lot later. I was just like browsing Wikipedia pages of scientists
Fair enough.
and entrepreneurs.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
uh, and yeah, no, no, the Wikipedia pages of entrepreneurs just seemed a lot more satisfying, and I felt that like the thing that I would probably enjoy doing is like building rather than discovering. And so I was thinking about that. Also, I think around the time at some point, I was like, literally, as I was trying to figure out what to do, I think at some point I literally like tried to write down things that I felt like I uniquely enjoy and that I like could be like uniquely good at. And I think that one of the things that I wrote there was, the thing that I uniquely enjoy is like, I think like people problems, and like I basically feel like I do enjoy like helping people and solving like the problems of people actually a lot more than I enjoy. again, like thinking about the nature of reality, like doing the things that scientists do, to yeah, uh, and uh, I, yeah, so that happened. And also I think I was realizing that, I guess, the other thing, I don't remember if I wrote that down or not, but I was just realizing that, like, the thing that I really enjoy doing is thinking about the systems and the structures of things, and how, like, yeah, like systems operate. And I think that uh, what eventually happened. Oh yeah, what happened was that I was actually on a honeymoon with my wife, and I was reading this book by Freeman Dyson called "From Eris to Gaia," and uh, at some point he was talking about, I think, like astronomy and like specifically telescopes, and how, like, the decisions behind which telescopes to create get made, and that uh, like often these are like decisions are not very scientific, they're like political, because like people just like want to create the biggest telescope that ever existed, and like because it like sounds cool, and not because it has a lot of scientific merit, often. And I was realizing that, yeah, I'm actually like like very interested in how, like, exactly these decisions get made, and how we can improve them. And yeah, yes, it was reading, I think, like that example, like basically this all of these things sort of collided in my head, like my interest in biology and my desire to do something related to biology, and my realization that, like, I want to uh, probably like help people, uh, rather, and like build things, and like think about the structures of things, and like this all sort of collided, and you realize that, okay, the thing that I should like can probably do is like uh, try to help scientists, like biologists specifically, and try to talk to them and try to help them do science better, and try to figure out how to improve the structures of science better, and uh, try to build something. Now, although at the time I actually hadn't, well, I actually didn't remember if like I had the thing about building at the time, or like I definitely didn't know what I wanted to build, and but yeah, like these things sort of like collided, and I realized that, and then yeah, and the intersection of that was the thing that I started doing with science, where I started talking to a lot of scientists, and like trying to figure out what are their constraints, and how can we how can I help them, and how can I well try to improve academia, and try to uh, I guess get more cool science happen. Uh, yeah, so this is how I got to the the project that I'm working on now. That was, I think, yeah, like in the middle of 2018.
Gotcha. Yeah, and it's really cool to hear you talk about your journey and how you got here because, well, I mean, a lot of people mention the fact that they had very um, they're just trying a lot of different things. They had very like sporadic sort of interests or attempts to like make things work before things actually worked. And I'm sure you've saw that kind of graph of like how somebody expects progress to be, and it's like this linear line, but like in reality it's just this just like giant like squiggle that somehow gets you to the answer at the end. And
Right.
there's one, I mean, it's one thing uh to know that, but it's another to kind of experience it for yourself and realize that yeah, this is actually true, and it's okay that I'm going between all these different interests. Like one thing that would
Yeah, from the
happen.
inside, it did not feel okay. Like for a
Yeah,
long time, I basically felt like, okay, I'm like switching interests every like 6 to 12 months, and that, like, I could not get focused on anything, and I like felt kind of terrible about that. And I think like only over time the other thing that I did that I forgot to mention is that I kept this starting my like second year in university. I started to do this thing I think like a couple of times per year, where on a list of paper I just write out like the things that I feel like I want to do in the long term, and like how like what like basically what I want to do in life, or like the potential like things that I feel like I want to do in life, and like why I want to do them, like how I want to get there. And I think the thing that really helped was that after doing that for a couple of years, I think I basically realized that even though I'm like feel like I'm jumping around from thing to thing, like sort of like the core motivation or like the core interest to like I guess basically do something important and do something that would help the world in some fashion basically uh, was not changing really. I was just like trying out different things at like how to do that, and uh yeah, just like eventually arrived at the thing that was at the intersection of like this and like things that I'm actually enjoying doing and that I can get obsessed by. Yeah.
I've actually been doing a very similar thing where I think yeah, like in my second year of university, I wrote out this big document of all of my interests and kind of the things that sort of attract me and the things that drive me, and as part of that list, I wrote out um, yeah, just things that I think would be helpful to work on, things that um, I could contribute to. And I've recently gone back to that list, and it's like, sure, some of it, uh, is a little bit maybe naive, but for the most part, the basic structure of that stayed the same. Or like you can see when you look back on what you write, you can see a kind of through line that maybe you don't see in the moment. Where it's
Right.
like
Yeah.
how you go through certain, I don't know exactly how to talk about this, but it's like you have like a thought phase almost, where you see a particular thing, you get inspired by a particular thing, it gets you really excited, and then you kind of get over it, and at a certain point, you kind of forget about that thing. But then the future things that get you excited, I mean, you can sort of look back on all of the things that get you excited, and if you keep track of all of this stuff, then you can actually notice that there's probably a much clearer pattern there that than you might think to begin with. But yeah, that's yeah.
Yeah.
I, I think yeah, that's something that's I think a very, yeah, like a very important thing to say, is that it's okay to sort of try different things, and sort of randomly go in different
Yeah.
directions. Um, but
Yeah.
so
Yeah. It's funny, or I don't know, I guess it is not funny, but I feel like among like people I know, they seem to like get discouraged quickly often by like they spend a couple of years trying out different things, and they like either decide to like continue doing the thing that they like are doing now, or they become like really discouraged upon like ever finding the thing that they would really want to do. And yeah, it kind of feels very suboptimal. Feels like it's natural that it's it often takes a lot of time to figure out what you want to do. And even though there are like people who's like in high school realize that, oh, here's what I want to do in life, and just like go and do that. But yeah, I think I spent, yeah, I guess for me it was like 5 or 6 years of like really actively thinking about what I actually want to do. Like, yeah, specifically thinking about this question before I realized that. or before like stumbled on the project that ended up being the thing. But like in the summer of 2018, when like the point of the story where we're in, I didn't know at the time that this was the thing that I would end up doing for such a long time, and that like I now hope that and I plan to continue doing for a very long time. But it was like not at all obvious back then that this would become it basically for me.
I think you hit on a really interesting point there, where it's natural to go between different interests and do all this soul searching. But if you, I think to a lot of people that doesn't seem natural, and in fact, the thing that they think is natural is to have a clear idea of what you want to do in life and just go and do that thing. Like whenever, for example, I would read like in many biographies of these famous people, for example, uh, you would read that there were, the famous scientist was very into science from a very young age, or like the famous entrepreneur was, started his first business in high school or something like this, and certainly when you look at the incentives, the sort of societal incentives, uh, you basically want to go to university, pick a career, and then go do that career. And so from the outside, it looks like everybody's making these very, decisive moves in their lives, and they seem very confident about what they're doing. Um, and um, what I noticed is that there's this kind of pressure that comes with that, where you know basically if you don't know what you're doing in life, basically like tough shit. A lot of people don't know what they're doing in life. Some people, are sort of like in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. They still don't know what they're doing in life. Maybe some people never figure it out. So that's not a certainty. Therefore, you should like go pick a thing to do and be useful, and then maybe at some point you'll sort of figure out the thing that you truly want to do. Which to me, kind of
Right,
sounds almost like um, yeah, sure. Like maybe you're not completely crazy about this girl, but you should just like go ahead and marry her, and then like maybe it's like you'll find happiness later on. Which to me that kind of seems like a this almost like fundamentally that's very dysfunctional. Like if you're making a kind of decision that's going to impact you for the rest of your life, you know. Doing basically the career equivalent of like an arranged marriage or something doesn't seem like that great of an idea. And yet, most
right,
people I find tend to follow that path of like, I'm gonna go get this major, and then based on this major, um, I have certain jobs that are open to me, and therefore I'm gonna go and pick those jobs instead of
right.
sort of
Yeah, and then if you don't
yeah.
and do this, you feel terrible about yourself because they're like already making money and like doing stuff, like
Mhm.
progressing, and then you're like fumbling around. Or at least this is, yeah. I feel like when I started doing my thing, I was like yeah, like I was not making any money, and I was like basically like living with my wife in my parents' apartment, in my like room in my parents' apartment where I like lived from when I was like uh 8 years old or something like this, and was just like trying like not buying anything for a year basically, or uh or, or and it was, yeah, very very, I don't know, discouraging to see mm, people around me like my friends already making like a lot of money because they went into finance, and who like could afford anything basically,
Hmm.
and I was like not able to do that. And also the other thing is like, I also in retrospect it seems, it might seem like I arrived at this like uh working on scientific institution things and institutions, and that it like this like up and down thing stopped, but like it totally did not. I basically for the majority of the time of me working on this, I had like no idea what the big picture is. I was talking to a lot of scientists, but I did not really know where this is going, and I did not know like what is the like, yeah, I did not know what I actually want to do about it. And we're like talking, like there are several like first of all, like we've been talking about like trying to improve like the existing institutions and existing structures, and this is the thing that I know it's kind of funny. I guess now it seems funny because it's like thinking about doing that in Russia, and I realized that yeah, like it does really make sense to improve the institutions of Russia. It's like does not work. Then I decided that I should do that for like in the global development, and then I realized that yeah, it doesn't really make sense. Like why would you do that? And then I decided, okay, I'm going to try to do the exact same thing except in science, and and try to figure out how to improve the institutions of science. And I don't know, in retrospect, it seems kind of ridiculous. And like, I basically failed at that task. Like, at the end of the day, I spent like a lot of time talking, like 2 years thinking about this and like trying to figure out how to improve the institutions of science. They basically failed. Like at the end of the day, I also concluded, yeah, there like does not seem to be like really any way for me to meaningfully affect like the existing institutions, because there's like universities and there's so many of them, and they're like so big but also so disjoined. So like they're not real leverage point, it seemed. And like there's the NIH, which is like basically dominates everything. And like I probably can't expect to change an agent that much. Like not in the last part because I'm Russian, and it's extremely unlikely that I'm ever going to become the head of the NIH, right? Uh, unless I don't know, I like do the thing that Schwarzenegger did, but like he became the governor of California at like 60, right?
Right.
And yeah, and like for basically like after I started thinking about this thing, I kept applying for jobs the entire time. I applied for like I think 10 to 15 jobs. I don't remember the exact amount, but I kept trying to get a job, and I like failed at that completely, which in retrospect seems good. But like it seems like it was a blessing in disguise, and probably like the fact that I was a Russian and I was like trying to like get a job in the US and hope that like someone would sponsor an H-1B visa for me. It was uh, yeah, kind of funny that I ended up not getting a job, and like had to keep working on this project of like thinking about the institutions of science, uh, and uh, at some point I was like so discouraged. Actually, I published this piece called "How Life Sciences Actually Work After the First Year of Research," but like right after I wrote it, I became just like really completely discouraged about the project, because it was like, okay, I'm like have a pretty good picture of how like things work, but yeah, I have no idea how to really change anything. And at some point, I was like trying to get a job in like a scientific lab, or like in a few scientific labs, and I thought that okay, maybe I should like work in in a biology lab, and like observe how things work directly and maybe help to run it better or something like that. And like I guess improve the institutions at this very low level. And then at some point, yeah, I already this was like almost a year and a half into me, or more than a year after I started working on this project. I applied with a friend uh, to Y Combinator, because I basically thought that, okay, like this project doesn't really make any sense. I should just like start a company and try to become very rich, and like go back and like do something about the institutions of science once I have a lot of money. And fortunately, we did not get into YC. And then yeah, and then I was like still very discouraged. I didn't, yeah, and then yeah, I remember it very well, where when I just like decided, it was like early September 2019, and I decided that, yeah, like this science project like does not make any sense, and I torrented a bunch of Udemy JavaScript courses, and I spent like a week just like learning JavaScript full time. I decided that I should just become a software engineer, and that was uh, pretty funny. Uh, yeah, and then like what happened next was that, yeah, well, I already got a couple of travel grants from Taylor's Common Emergent Ventures to be able to travel from Russia to the US and to talk to scientists and to people who might be helpful with the project. And in September of 2019, when I was like learning how to code and was like actually on the trip, I applied to Y Combinator with my friend. But basically, at that conference that he organized for people who he gave grants to, I met this postdoc from Cambridge who was working on a really cool biology project there. And we started talking in the conference, and we kept talking after the conference. And I thought that like his project is actually really cool, and maybe I should, yeah, like I should, instead of working in the institutions of science, I could actually just like join his project. So like I guess my thought process was that I there's like I could join his project and like just maybe I still want to do science, and I wanted to figure that out. And then like it seemed that he might be starting a biotech company out of that project, and I thought that this is really exciting, and maybe I could like join his project and join his company and help him build this biotech company. And then I also thought that, okay, like this, maybe I'll like spend some time working on that project and working in the lab. And I was like we were discussing like doing worm experiments, like analyzing experimental data, like learning in worms. And I thought that this would be helpful for my project, for my institutions of science project, if I go back to it, because I like get the uh, I guess the direct knowledge of how biology actually works, that was not accessible to me from just talking to people. So we ended up yeah, so I ended up flying down to Cambridge in December 2019 and hanging out with a friend of mine for 2 weeks, and like I guess being annoying in the lab, and then and we decided that, yeah, that it would make sense for me to visit them for a longer period of time and to try to like work with them and see if it makes sense for me to join my friend and like another person who was working with him on the project, who was, I think, a grad student at the time. And so we convinced his uh, uh, yeah, so we convinced his uh, head of the lab to like basically invite me as a visiting student to Cambridge to help him on the project. And Tyler agreed to fund this like basically to fund me for 6 months as visiting as a visiting student. And yeah, and then like I started working with my friend remotely and like reading papers and like trying to like thinking about the experimental design. And then right when all of my documents were ready, and as I was about to apply for the visa, like it was March of 2020. And in March of 2020, that was exactly the time when the like Western world was becoming like really, really agitated about COVID. and my I got an email from Cambridge, and they were like, "Yes, sir, like closing down everything, and we're canceling all of the visiting students, and that we're not going to be able to host you." So, so I ended up not going to Cambridge. I ended up working on the project for like the first half of 2020, and like yeah, reading a lot of papers, like figuring out how to design experiments,
Mm.
like learning a little bit of bioinformatics, and like learning relearning linear algebra, because it was like actually I spent like a month relearning like learning linear algebra to be able to understand like the mathematical details of the work that my friend was doing. But yeah, and so like throughout the whole thing, I basically was like really discouraged on that institutions of science project, which uh, which like might seem like I just like started working on it in 2018, and I just kept working on it, and then like now founded the organization because I like. Uh, yeah, but what happened eventually was that it yeah was becoming clearer that I'm not going into the lab anytime soon, that like the lab stays closed down, and that it like working remotely on a project was like fun for some time, and I learned a bunch of like things that I'm like really glad that I learned. But uh, it was not the thing that I was planning to do, and it did not seem too useful. But also, I I noticed that even though I did not have a big picture of what I want to do when I was working on that, I noticed that every time I heard about someone working in the institutions of science, I was like becoming really mad, and I was like, why the hell am I not working on this? Why the hell
Right,
am
right.
I working on the
Yeah,
science project?
like you
Which
could be doing that.
again was really fun, but yeah, but like it was funny how like this is like this really visceral experience of me, like I remember, yeah, just like reading about someone like thinking about the structures of science, and it was like, why the hell are they thinking about this? And like they're going to be able to think about this better than I am, and they're going to like do the things that I would have done instead. And I don't remember like ever having this visceral reaction to like pretty much anything, I think. And this was the thing that, well, I guess like was a strong mm, uh, factor for me, that like realization that yeah, I actually want to work on the institutions of science. And then like yes, so I was feeling that, but also in like I think somewhere around a year ago, I got the idea in my head that, well, like I could not figure out how to improve the institutions of science, right? And the idea that I got in my head was that, okay, since I cannot cannot figure out how to improve the institutions of science, then like why not just try to build new institutions of science, basically, in the same way that like when like we see a company that's not working well, we can just like go and build another company and outcompete the first company, right? And I got this idea in my head around a year ago, and then I basically spent the well, I guess I sort of like became really convinced actually this is the right thing to do very quickly. I feel like within a month or so, and I was like decided that yeah, I should actually just go and build new institutions of science. But like I had no idea what this actually entails, and I had like no idea what this like actually means. And I spent the next like 6 months or so like trying to figure out what exactly does this entail, and actually not like way more than 6 months, and like what does this mean in the long term, and like what does this mean in the short term, and like does the idea of building new institutions of science actually make sense? I think I only became like finally like really convinced that yeah, it does make sense, and I do have a good picture of like what this entails in the long term, and I do have a good picture of what like this entails in the short term, only like 3 months ago or so. And uh yeah, and throughout that time I was also like as usually like depressed and discouraged for significant periods of time, and I have like my journal entries where I'm like, yeah, this doesn't make any sense, or or rather actually like the journal entries that I have are not like that, but they're more of a, which is like sort of like encouraging to me, because like the things that I was feeling like in the last year was that, yeah, I have like, I feel terrible. I don't know what like I should do. I don't know whether the thing I'm thinking about makes sense, but like I'm convinced that this is like the thing I should be working on, and that I'm like meta level convinced that this makes sense, even if I'm not object level convinced like what exactly I should be doing. And this was actually very encouraging. And yeah, I think I like finally like became like object level convinced about everything if just a few months ago. And um, actually have been feeling pretty great
Hmm.
since then, since I figured that that out. um, yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, I can imagine that that's like this is such a wonderful feeling for you. And I can certainly relate to this. Well, when you're talking about, maybe I should just do a startup, make a lot of money, and then come back to this problem that I've been thinking about for a while. I've definitely thought about very very similar things, but I I mean this like there's this idea in there that's if you want to do something, you should just kind of go straight ahead for it instead of trying to take some kind of more roundabout path that seems more I don't know, how should I say, like, I guess feasible in your mind. Like for me, what I've noticed was I was very interested in brain computer interfaces and cognitive science and all these kinds of things. But um, the ideas I had and the projects that I wanted to work on didn't seem like, they almost seemed too ambitious out there, too crazy in a way. Where I felt that, well, actually, what I should do is I should go, uh, for example, work at a startup that is doing related things to this, and then try to figure out from there how to circle back and implement my ideas,
Right.
or I should go work for this big company or whatever. But then, actually, also just a few months ago, I was just kind of thinking about things, and I had this realization that, well, I've had this interest for a long time. Why? And I like, why not just pursue that directly, right? There's this weird way in which I've noticed that you kind of come up in your mind with reasons for why that thing doesn't seem attainable, and so you kind of pick these like roundabout ways to get there. um, I don't know, you, I guess, can relate to
Right.
that to an extent.
Yeah, but I mean the funny thing is though that often this is true, that you can't really go about the thing that you want to do directly. Like, even so, the thing that I'm doing right now is like I'm starting a nonprofit, right? And the first project of this nonprofit is this like summer fellowship for young scientists. And well, the long term goal is to build new institutions of basic science. But the thing is, had I gotten this idea that I want to build the institutions of science and that this is the way to go about it 3 years ago, when I was just starting to think about this, it probably wouldn't have worked out. Like, if for this nonprofit, it requires like a lot of support structure. It requires like people, like biologists who I can like lean on. It requires people, other people who can like, I can ask for advice, and who will want to give me advice, and who will want to help me, and who believe in me. And for like fundraising, it has been very helpful that I have a body of written work that people are aware of. and that people know that I did interesting research and interesting writing in the past, and now they want to help me, or they have evidence that I guess that I did something interesting in the past. And all of these things, like the fact that talked to a lot of people and like developed these relationships and developed like some amount of good reputation for doing interesting things, has been like absolutely, like basically necessary for the nonprofit. Like for a startup, perhaps it's like you just like start coding the thing and you code it up, and then you can like go and like show it to VCs, or go and show it to customers, well, or like I guess run some ads, or like figure out how to distribute the thing, or like how to get people convinced that this is worth supporting very easily, because there is like gigantic infrastructure for like helping startup companies, software company, like startups get started. But for the thing that I'm doing, there's like zero such infrastructure. And i, I yeah, I feel like it might be the case that like had I gotten the idea of building new institutions like 3 years ago, I would have like not seen a way to do that, and would have gotten very discouraged, and would have like gone and worked on something else instead.
Mm.
But but what happened was that I like did not have this picture, and so I was just trying to talk to a lot of people and like try to figure out what's going on and what I should work on. And in the process of doing that, I like basically accidentally ended up, like semi accidentally ended up meeting a lot of people, and with a lot of them I continued talking, and I ended up publishing like a bunch of interesting pieces while doing all of that. And like in the process of me stumbling around and not knowing what to do, I developed all of this like supporting infrastructure that at the end of the day ended up being essential for me actually doing the thing that I'm doing now. And so it like right and so this first 2 years were the roundabout thing for me. And uh, yeah, which is uh, kind of funny, because I know there's like this question that's pretty entertaining, whether of like what kind of an advice would you give to your younger self, like to prevent them from making like the stupid mistakes that you made.
Mm.
And I'm like sort of wondering, okay, so like if I told my younger self that like this is the project that the the younger Alexey should be working on, then like there's a good chance that it would have been bad for him, because as
At
I
the very least, it
mentioned, he
wouldn't be
would just gotten
actionable because
discouraged.
yeah.
Right, because right, because like, and the thing about me is that like again, I'm like bad at working things for like instrumental reasons. I'm like bad at like only doing the thing because it will help me do some other thing in the future. And like had my younger self known that in order to start this nonprofit, he would need all of that infrastructure, and would have like done this like research project or whatever in order to get the nonprofit started. I like sort of wonder whether like he would even be able to do that. But instead, like because like figuring out how to improve science was it felt like my terminal goal. I was very motivated to do it, and I ended up doing that. And and then like it's sort of, I think that there's like actually a lot of things like this in life where I, I don't know. One example that I feel I want to give is like, I don't know, maybe like relationships where like maybe everyone is just terrible at relationships when they are like in the first relationship or two, and they usually I feel like just go terribly. But then if you but you sort of like have to believe that like this is the right thing to do in order to even attempt it, and not
Mm.
think that this relationship is probably going to be terrible, and like you're going to be in a great deal of pain, and the other person is going to be in a great deal of pain, and he's probably just going to blow up in your face terribly, and then uh, you sort of like have to lack the knowledge that yes, like this relationship is probably not going to be your last relationship. This relationship is probably not going to be very good. It's probably like will be good for you at the end of the day because you learn a great deal of stuff, and it's like probably going to be like fun and yeah, and stuff. But then you really should and like have to believe that yes, this is like the greatest thing that will ever happen. And unfortunately, we do end up believing that, and like I certainly believed that in my first relationship, and it was absolutely
Right.
terrible, and you like blew up terribly, and at the end of the day, it was useful. And again, I feel like if my like younger self was informed that yes, like this first relationship is just going to be terrible, it's going to blow up, don't do it, then like he would have never done that, and then he would have like just been terrible at relationships. And yeah, I
Or
think
maybe an
that
equally bad piece of advice
situations
would have
like
been
this
like,
happen.
oh, yes, this relationship is going to be terrible and it's going to blow up and everything, but do it anyway because it'll be a great learning experience. And
Right,
to
but then this would be right, but that's this. But the thing is about that advice is that it would like destroy the magic, sort of like because
well,
like
exactly, that's what I
this
mean. Yeah.
relationship wouldn't like really be real, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I feel like I'm very much I have a very similar mentality when it comes to like it's very hard for me to convince myself to work for these kind of I guess like instrumental goals that are at some point supposed to lead to some kind of sort of like terminal goal. Um, if for me, like if I don't see the justification of like, well, like what I'm doing now is the thing that I guess ultimately matters and is important, then it's very hard for me to stay motivated on that thing. Um, so yeah, no, definitely,
Right,
I can relate to that a lot. And I feel like the other thing there is that, well, yeah, so you in every um I guess decision, you're kind of you're led by this idea of thinking that this is what I'm doing right now is right and true, and this is the thing that I should be working on, even though it's you know maybe not the thing that you'll end up like working on in the future. But by by doing this, it also um, it's crazy how when you work on a project and even though it doesn't work out, the it's crazy how many lessons you learn, but it's also crazy how that changes your vantage point um, of like maybe it's the people you've met along the way, or maybe it's the a particular change in your worldview that then allows you like every new project you start, you're kind of starting from a different position, and oftentimes it's from a more informed position. And so I feel like that kind of relates to what you're talking about with if you were to just tell your younger self to you know like create new science right away, um, that person just wouldn't have had the right vantage point for it. So yeah, that's
right, yeah,
yeah. um, but I feel like so um, we've been talking a lot about improving the structures of science, but haven't I feel like clearly I guess talked about like what is it exactly that is uniquely wrong with the structures of science or academia, And well, for example, in your post that you wrote about how the life sciences actually work, you kind of outline a lot of these things. Just to read a quick quote from you in that post, you write that specific parts of academia that seem to be problematic, uh, rigid, punishing for deviation, career progression, peer review, need to constantly fundraise for professors. Parts that seem to be less of a problem than I initially thought: short termism, lack of funding for young scientists. Um, so, can you, I guess, expand on that, or is there anything that you would, yeah, like, how do you feel about that? I guess statement and just like, yeah, um, just in general the state of science.
Right. I think that like these points that you quoted are I mostly agree on. Mostly agree with. I think the one that although I think I like broadly became more pessimistic about the state of academia since writing that, and like specifically, well, one of the things that I mentioned is the funding for young scientists, and I like I think like I agree with this point like literally as it is written. I like it seemed like less of a problem than I initially thought, like the funding for young scientists. However, like substantively, it like seems to me like a gigantic problem. Like and specifically, like there are. It is true that at the end of the day it's the like grad students and postdocs who do end up like spending the money that are like awarded for doing science, and that they're the people who like do the experiments and like actually do science and often come up with the ideas, and they often have quite a lot of freedom, especially the postdocs, and in this way it is less of a problem, like the lack of funding for young scientists is less of a problem than I initially thought. But at the same time, i I came to think that like the sort of the opportunity for young scientists is uh, really lacking, and like specifically for like I think people who want to do something differently, uh, in that. So to give an example, like think about Bill Gates, for example. He started Microsoft when he was like 20, or 19 or 20 or something like that. And uh, he had an idea of like what he wanted to do, and he just like started doing it. And when he was 19 and 20, he like probably had no idea how to run a company, and he was probably like really bad at it. But then he just like started doing the thing, and uh, was able to pursue his vision, and was supported by like was able to hire people from like from the industry with more experience who helped him to build his company, and he was supported by like venture capitalists who, well, that was back in the 70s. I think like the venture capital industry existed in some form, but like there was a lot of support infrastructure that helped him to build a company, and he was able to start building out his vision when he was very young. And in science, uh, like I personally know people who at like at the age of like 22, 23, after they finished their undergrad, like they spent many years doing science. They like spent many years in the lab doing different things, and they spent many years reading research papers, and where by the time they graduate from graduated from undergrad, they have a pretty good idea of what they actually want to do, and they have a pretty good idea of like what they want to like of a research vision that they want to build out, and they just literally have no ability to do that, like just zero. They in academia you have to go to grad school, like almost required to do a postdoc, and only at the age of like 35 or 40 you're going to be able to uh, like open your own lab and actually start building out your vision. Before that, you're going to be an employee, you're going to be a graduate student in someone else's lab, you're going to be a postdoc in someone else's lab. Like if you're very lucky, you're going to have an independent postdoc, but you basically have no ability to 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 build out your vision when you're a like without the regard to credentials, but just based on the fact that you have the vision. And uh, I'm like not claiming that there are many people who have this thing out of undergrad, and I'm not claiming that they would be very good at it, but like am convinced that like the people who are like these outliers are like often the people who matter the most. And now and like they for them it would have been a lot better to like run their lab for 6 years and like start like build out their thing instead of being a grad student for 6 years, and
Mhm.
like if they're lucky work on the thing that interests them, if they're unlucky just like work on thing that like their advisor told them to work on, and they're like discouraged from going into science essentially, and because they like would be required to spend like 10 years, like 10 plus years before being able to start a lab. And uh, even they're like have little control over their life essentially. Like in academia you have to fly between like fly to wherever your job is, and like often like most professor jobs are like not in uh, or like yeah they're like sort of randomly distributed, and you don't have much control over where you're going to be working on, and you have to work on things that your peers find interesting. And there's s- yes this like general thing where there's just not a lot of control over your life for a long period of time as a scientist. So this is the thing that like I became convinced that it's actually really important to give young people opportunity, like especially young people who want to do something different, the opportunity to do something different. And academia is just terrible at it, and I feel like we're probably losing a lot not doing that. But right now I'm talking about people who want to like build out the research vision and start a lab and stuff. But on the other hand, like there are people who just want to do science, and like I think most scientists actually do not want to build a lab. They just want to be scientists and to continue doing science. And the funny thing is that like academia fucks them as well. Like academia has this like rigid track where you do undergrad, you go to grad school, you do a postdoc, you become a professor, and like there is no place for a person who just wants to continue to be a scientist. Like you can do science, but like you're going to be working in someone else's lab, and then you have to become a professor and start your own lab and hire people and manage people and write grants and like spend like a quarter of your time actually thinking about science and probably not being in the lab and stuff. And there are very few these research scientist positions where you're actually able to like continue doing science, and it's I don't know, kind of amusing and tragic that uh, academia forces everyone to go through this like one route, and people who like want to build things early are extremely discouraged from doing that, and people who well don't want or like build a lab early cannot do that, and people who do not want to lab also cannot do that. Like you have to build a lab to stay in science, and you have to do it at like one particular point when you like accumulated enough credentials and stuff, which is, yeah, just bizarre. And the thing that I very much hope to do something about with new science.
Yeah, there's this Bucky Fuller quote that I just keep coming back to over and over. He basically was saying that, well, like everybody is born a genius, but something about the process of living degeniuses them. Um, and it's you feel that a lot in academia, where it's like there's this kind of youthful energy and drive and enthusiasm that just gets like stamped out, and it's not clear that when that does get stamped out, if you can then like reignite that in people. Like, let's say you're very enthusiastic about doing some kind of research project in your 20s, and then you realize that you have to go through the academic system and basically become a bureaucrat for 10 years. And after being a bureaucrat for 10 years, do you still want to do your really ambitious sort of research project? Well, probably not. And so that's, yeah, to me that's kind of uh, I guess like heartbreaking in a way, because you would think that academic institutions would be the place where, I mean, my ideal academic institution is basically a place that encourages people to, I guess, thrive and self actualize and um, learn about the world, and then usefully contribute something unique to the world. Um, but yeah, it just seems that even in my undergrad degree, I'm just noticing this, that it a lot of it is just like teaching people to become bureaucrats. Basically, it's like, well, if I write this essay, um, what would the professor think about this essay? Should I include this part in it? Like, how would that like affect my grade? And it's this whole idea of just trying to optimize for sort of for grades, and then this same mentality carries into professional life, and it's, yeah, I don't know. I guess you're focusing with new science. You're focusing more on the research side of things, but have you have you thought about the learning aspect of academia, or I mean, do you think these things are kind of related problems, or um, separate, and need sort of new or like different solutions to them?
Right.
Because in a way, like the research feels
Yeah,
broken, but
I'm
also the
not thinking
learning
about.
also feels broken.
Yeah, I think there's a good chance that new science will try to do something about learning at some point in the future. But I have no immediate plans for that, and the reason being that like I want to attack one small niche at a time and expand the thing new science does gradually, and the thing that uh, seems more important actually right now is like focus on research. But the other thing is that honestly, like learning seems less broken to me than research. Like uh, undergrad the undergrad experience of my friends in the US seems pretty great usually. Like you do really have the ability to just like do whatever you want. You can party, you can study, you can join clubs, you can study whatever you want. Nobody is going to force you into like some rigid program where you like do things that are boring. Like if you think that the course, like my understanding is that MIT, for example, like there's like a 2 week period after the start of the semester during which you can drop the course and without any penalty. And this is like just mind blowing to me, where in Russia I had like my like course, all of the like almost all of the courses were like in the like know like 4 years in advance what I'm going to take.
Mhm.
And in like when I just like applying for the program. And in the US you can, well, like obviously there are major requirements, but you can switch your major if you don't like your major. And you can, yeah, like, so undergrad, I don't know, does not seem that bad to me. I guess although I have not first experienced it firsthand, of course. And then grad school, like even though I was talking about like people not being able to start a lab before grad school, like grad school is often like pretty great. You like conditional on you getting in I guess in a lab where you vibe with the professor, and where like you end up working on things that you think are important and interesting. uh, like grad school is great. You just like do science, you do the thing that you love, and you get paid like not a lot of money, but like enough to live on for a bunch of years. And this is, to me, is like almost like doing the arts, basically. And well, grad school is bad if, of course, you you do not get in a lab where you're able to do the thing that you think is important, and then you're just going to have like a miserable experience. And then like professors, like everyone tells me that like management in academia is just like not very good. And there are lots of problems in grad school, but I think that grad school is actually like often quite okay. And
Mhm.
yeah, the thing that I decided to specialize now is on research rather than learning, basically, as a result of all of this.
That makes sense. Yeah. I
But
guess
also, learning is just like much harder to. The other thing is that like learning, like learning what for. Like at the end of the day, I want to like the purpose of new science is to like facilitate scientific research, right? But like if I attack learning, then like people are going to be going into the existing research structures, or I would need to also attach new research structures on top of learning. And then like it basically seems that the existing research structures are more broken than learning is broken, and it does make sense to start attack research structures now, and then like potentially expand to learning in the future.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess the only thing that I was trying to hit on there is that it seems that whatever problems you're going to find in learning and in research seem to come from almost it's almost like the same root cause. Like there's some there's um I don't know when I read about academic institutions, for example, in America in let's say the 40s, 50s, 60s, things seem to be a lot. I mean, like things seem to be done a lot more competently, and the institutions seem like they're actually able to carry out pretty impressive research. Uh, all of these sort of problems with academia that we talked about today didn't seem to exist or exist in a much smaller capacity. So I don't know if I guess like have you like I'd assume you've done a lot of kind of research and reading into this, but I'd be curious if you have a take as to why these things became worse and sort of like degraded over time. Would you even agree with that? With that, I guess with that frame. I don't know.
Yeah, I would avoid making any strong statements here, because honestly, I guess I have sort of a hot take that a lot of history is not very useful, and that we like have actually a pretty bad idea of how things worked in the past. And I
Tend to idealize
well,
things.
because of this, I read a lot of history that interests me for like other reasons. I don't know. I think like ancient Roman history is pretty fascinating, and like military history is fascinating. But I guess read a little bit of like history of how science worked, but I feel like yeah, I'm definitely not in a position to tell whether like science worked better in like 1940s than it works today. And yeah, I guess like we do observe the changes, like the evolution of academia over the last few decades at least. And it does, or like there are statistics where we just see that the uh, scientists like keep getting awarded their like grants at older ages, or like I think we can do this like thought experiments of whether would like the scientists who we like think have been the greatest scientists in the past, would they have been able to become successful scientists today? And like often we sure that the answer is probably no. But uh, Y- yeah, and because of this, I think like I don't know. Anecdotally, I do feel that the thing that we observe is that since I mean, the existing structure funding of biology appeared right after the Second World War, where the NIH started to grow really rapidly, and like before that, like science just worked completely differently, and what we uh, observe is that this is the way science works under that regime. And uh, it does seem that there are a lot of problems, but honestly, like it's yeah, it's not clear just like how much better or worse things were at particular points in the past. Uh, yeah, and I would, yeah, I don't know, I'm not a big fan of this like historical comparisons.
Makes sense. Um, yeah. Well, I guess it I think it's an important kind of, well, if you know sort of why the current institutions are in the state that they are, I would assume that it'd be like easier to try to prevent that with any sort of alternative or with any sort of new institution that you try to sort of come up with, right? Um, so if you like,
Right. Yeah.
if it,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. This is a
so you
good
want
point actually. In that, in that, yeah, like the institutions have like problems, not just like completely randomly. It's likely that like they sort of evolved into the like the things that they have become for reasons, and it's actually helpful to figure out what these reasons are and to avoid just doing the same thing that they did and growing into the exact same problems. And yeah, this is actually a good point. And uh, at the same time, I feel like the meta level point I have is that I sort of skeptical that any organization can like remain interesting for a long period of time. In
You have this
and
like
that
natural life
like
cycle of
especially without competition.
mhm.
Yeah, and like it's like natural like for any organization that at the start it attracts people who like working at new organizations and who are probably uh, uh, not risk averse. And then like inevitably as the organization grows, it starts to attract different people, and it starts to like get burned and develop processes, and like it really feels to me inevitable that organizations become less interesting over time. And like when there is competition, the companies like are forced by other companies to like continue doing to like not become completely bogged down in like the processes and risk aversion, but especially, and they like still usually fail, and like we see companies die all the time, and like we see startups all the time overcome incumbents who like it seems have much more resources. But especially for institutions where there is no real competition, like the NIH, like it just seems natural that after, so it's been like doing the thing that it's been doing for like 70 years almost now, or about 70 years. And it's very natural that after all the time without any competition, it like sort of grew, like even despite the best efforts from the people who run it, and despite the best efforts from the government, it grew into the thing that like could probably do a lot better. And that it does seem to me make sense to like just try to do something entirely new. And for new science as well, I sort of expect that in like 50 years, well, assuming it exists in 50 years, in 50 years, it's probably just like sort of structurally not going to be able to do very interesting things, or things that are as interesting things as like the new organization working on scientific institutions 50 years later would have been able to do. And it just seems like uh, yeah, a pretty natural cycle to me of how things work.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
One of the other things that you mention on the New Science website uh, is that basically you want to distinguish new science from academia in a cultural way. One of the points that you hit on is like, well, the you can have two organizations, for example, that have pretty similar structures, but when you look at the culture of these things and the people who inhabit them, then you can it can lead to very different results. Um, and so I mean, one of the things I was kind of curious about is that, well, I've noticed that in academia, there seems to be this level of like, um, I guess, groupthink in a way, where a lot of the academic institutions seem to be very similar to one another, and they seem to come to very similar conclusions about things. Um, and so I guess I was curious, how you plan to keep the institutions of new science, I guess, immune to the sort of groupthink that we see in academia today.
Um, so honestly, I'm not entirely clear what you mean by groupthink in academia, but I guess the like in terms of like uh, culture, the way I think about this is that
Well,
yeah, like academia does
yeah,
indeed.
just sorry. I guess, like, just to clarify a little bit. I guess what I meant was this kind of, culturally, academia seems to be very homogenous. Like, if you go to, I don't know, Harvard, versus if you go to Yale, versus if you go to any of these other places, it seems that there's very little difference in terms of the culture, and all of these places seem kind of like these, I guess, like bureaucratic institutions in some sense that don't really have a lot of distinguishing characteristics. Um, that's kind of what I meant.
Right.
I don't know to what extent you would
Yeah,
I
I think.
guess maybe agree with that, but
Yeah, I think this is mostly true. I think this is, yeah, like, I guess this is mostly true. There are like cultural differences between like Stanford and Harvard and Yale, and there are research institutes like Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, for example, that, from my talking to people, do have like kind of a different culture. But it is true that academia is this, at the end of the day, actually, uh, like a pretty I want to say monolithic entity, in that, so to be specific, you, like, because the NIH specifically dominates funding in biology, then the result of this is that, like, everyone is sort of judged by, uh, like, is forced to be judged by the things that, like, the NIH finds interesting and wants to judge people by, and this is like a very particular type of, uh, I guess, evaluation, where the NIH is really interested in, like, is interested in, like, some topics more than others, and, like, is interested in some, like, specific forms of output, like specifically, like, papers in papers in peer-reviewed journals published as a result, as outputs of the grants that NIH funds. And the universities often, like, when universities hire people, like hire someone to be a professor, they, like, the the question of whether the person is going to be able to get funded by the NIH is one of the first, like, one of the most important questions when that that universities ask when deciding to hire someone or not. And so this does ensue this, like, sort of like pretty broad level, I think, of homogeneity of, like, how people end up approaching things. And there are some differences in, for example, again, in Cold Spring Harbor, although there, again, it's funded in a very significant part by the NIH, and so people are subject to the same pressures of, like, the things, of the types of things to work on, the types of things that are considered to be, like, proper research outputs, uh, and uh, at the same time, there are research institutes that are independent from the NIH, and where, so for example, there exists this lab called HHMI Genelia, uh, close to Washington DC, where all researchers are fully internally funded, and they do not need to seek funding from the NIH. But at the same time, the terms there are limited, and so the people who go to HHMI Genelia to do research, like, most of them will need to go back to, the, or, like, will need to seek a job at a university at some point in the future, and they will need to seek funding from the NIH at some point in the future. And then, at the end of the day, they, like, even though Genelia tries to do something different, because it's still integrated with academia in this, like, very strong way. Like, the grad students who go to Genelia will, like, need to find a postdoc and will need to find a job in a university. Just like the ones that want to go into academia, they are also at the end of the day like pressured uh, to do the things that the NIH finds interesting and worthwhile, and that the universities who look at NIH would want to see on the researcher's CV. So uh, I guess the question was like, how would new science do things differently, and like how would new science try to like uh, free people from working on being dominated by like the culture of academia, like the culture that the NIH imposes, and like on academia of like the types of things that are considered interesting and worthwhile, and that like approaches that are considered, and the styles of doing work that are considered appropriate. And uh yeah, I guess the answer is that like it's going to be very very hard to do, because like uh, all of the basic science happens within the structures, and uh, the plan for new science is to start basically start to do things where people uh, can take part in projects that uh, would sort of like not conflict with the things that academia would want them to do directly that much. So specifically, for example, like the first project that New Science will do is this summer fellowships for young scientists, and the expectation would be that these young scientists would do something that they wouldn't be able to do in the normal course of their work. Like they're a grad student, they the thing that they wouldn't be able to do in their lab normally, or uh, yeah, and so here, because the summer fellowship is like only lasts for one summer, and the expectations that people would do something different, but because it's just 3 months long, then the people would be able to actually just like take this uh, sort of try out this thing where they uh, like even if they fail completely to do the thing that they're trying to do over the summer, they will be able to just like go back to whatever they were doing and to continue on the same track without like really being punished for doing something different. So this is the first thing. The first thing. The second thing is that the plan for new science is to start like very small, and well, the summer fellowship program is pretty small, but the thing is that new science will seek to support a pretty small number of researchers, and like to support and to enable a pretty small number of researchers initially. And the plan is basically to like uh, filter for people who are like not very satisfied with academia, and who would want to do things differently, and who would be like partial to like trying out this is different culture, and trying out things that the normal academia would not necessarily want them to do, and to try to work on more risky or interesting and underexplored areas. And uh, there like if new science targets this like small number of people initially, then it's going to be able to like uh, to not really care that much about being like really influenced by academia, because like these people would not really be interested even in working in academia. They would want to do basic research, but they wouldn't really be interested in working in academia. And so, for example, if I feel like most of the grad students I talk to these days, like even though like the ones that are really talented and are really interested in basic science, I feel like most of them do not actually like end up dropping out of academia. And so for them, new science could try to like for example figure out how to give them an independent fellowship to work on the thing that they're working on, but after finishing their PhD, but outside of academia. And then if the person is thinking about dropping out of academia anyway and going into biotech or whatever, then like during this independent fellowship, they wouldn't be that affected by the tastes of academia, because like they're not really interested in like getting a job there anyway. And then like maybe right now new science is not really going to be able to offer people new like long-term career perspectives. But then the plan is that, so the first people I hope to support uh, with like the summer fellowship, and maybe this like short independent fellowships, after which people will like probably need to like go and do whatever they were going to do anyway. But then like gradually over time to increase the scope of support, and to like enable people to like hire people outside of academia, and to like do basic science outside of academia for a longer period of time, and then like gradually to like eventually enable people to actually start labs outside of academia. But then once this like there is more opportunity, and to offer people longer term perspectives, then like it will matter like a bit less that like whether the person is, or yes, like new science will actually be able to uh, sort of build out this independent uh, structure, where yeah, I guess where people are able to work on the things that are different from academia, because they're either would not be interested in going into academia, or they would be able to like know that they're going to be able to work on the things that interest them for a long period of time, and not be concerned by uh, again like getting a job in academia, or doing the things that the NIH would find interesting, and like doing the things that would look good on their normal academic CV.
That makes a lot
uh,
of
I
sense.
hope that was clear.
Yeah, yeah, that was clear. One of the well, one of the things you mentioned is the sort of uh, like the peer review system in modern academia, and you know, like I guess the thing that I'd be curious about is what specifically do you see wrong with that aspect of academia, and if uh, the research that is helped and facilitated by new science, like if that kind of research wouldn't use the peer review system, what kind of system would it use? Would you see kind of in its place?
Right. So uh, I think that peer review in the most general sense is like not bad, because at the end of the day like someone has to evaluate the quality of your work. And uh, the the problem with the way peer review currently works is that like in journals it when you try to publish a paper in a journal, and it's sent to reviewers, and like and then you have to go through cycles of revisions, and you have to do the things that uh, like the reviewers want you to do, even if it doesn't really add to the paper, and even if it takes a long time, then like this becomes a problem. And but this is a problem more for like yeah, like the way peer review currently works, and not like the general idea of a peer review. and the peer review that I think would make more sense, and the way that like the publishing actually like slowly is moving in that direction is post publication peer review, where you first like publish your paper on the internet, and then other researchers just like read it, and naturally as they read it they like comment on it, or they critique it, or they figure out ways to improve it, and they do, yeah, so they do post publication peer review. And uh, I think that honestly I don't know what exactly is the type of peer review that like how exactly peer review will be structured for science done it like or like enabled by new science. I think there's like maybe actually people will like, I think publishing is really important, and maybe people will want to publish in normal scientific journals and want to go through the normal peer review procedures, but I think in the long term it probably makes sense to like build out the structures, like the systems around post publication peer review, where you do some research, you write up a paper, you publish the paper, and then the other researchers engage with it in public and um, review it in public, and then there's an open discussion about the paper, and about the research.
Yeah, I like that a lot. In a way, I can't help but think that you kind of practice that to an extent with some of the blog posts that you've written. Like for example, the blog post about like critiquing Matt Walker's book, Why We Sleep. If you go look at that blog post, there's like ton of appendices and sort of like responses to criticisms from various
Yeah,
people,
yeah,
and
exactly.
that like to me that when I come across that article and I read it, that shows that that like this person has really thought through all of the feedback that that he's gotten, and this stuff like through getting feedback, this the article is made stronger for it, and that's kind of nice.
Right,
And
yeah. Yeah,
so
and
yeah,
also
I think
the
that
it's
makes sense.
like, yeah, and also it's like a living document, right? As people read, as you pointed out, as people read the piece, I like I encounter a critique, and I like fix the critique, and I note in the text that, oh, there was a mistake and I fix that, or I just like write up and like Q&A for like why I don't think this critique is actually strong, and I append it to the piece. And it's actually kind of bizarre that today scientific papers like get published, and then they're like forever stuck in whatever state they were published in. And like if you discover that something was wrong, like you can send the correction to the journal, but it's a really painful process to do that. And if you figure out a way to improve the paper, you sort of like basically don't have a way to do that. You like have to write a new paper with new results. And yeah, this is kind of bizarre. It's I am like really inspired by Gwern. I think like people who do this like long content, where they like gradually like they write pages and gradually update them over time, and gradually make them better in response to feedback and in response to their learning. And I'm trying to kind of do that. And uh, yeah, it would be like really interesting what this could look like in science, because this is like basically not happening at all. They're discrete papers that like get published, and uh, that are, yeah, stuck in whatever condition they were published, unless there's some egregious mistake and or like fraud, after which like the paper is retracted or something.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that kind of ties into that maybe would be allowing like annotations or input on for example a paper or something like that. Like if you had a for example the option to have a comment section for some kind of published paper, right?
Right.
And that way you'd be able to get feedback from everybody, which I'm sure a lot of those comments maybe wouldn't be very helpful, but it kind of opens up the um, you'd be doing a lot less gatekeeping that way, and kind of letting, I guess,
Right. Well,
people.
the good thing is that, yeah, the good thing is that this is actually already kind of happening. And like, because in biology, if you publish in bioarchive, like you can publish the paper there, and then people will discuss on Twitter, and then like the people on Twitter, and there's actually a comment section under the paper, and there's this site called PubPeer where people can comment on papers. And uh, so it's like things are actually moving in that direction. But like, yeah, the I guess the it's a very a slow process, because at the end of the day, like, the thing that is counts as a proper research contribution, especially when like uh, in job promotions or in, again, for grants, are peer-reviewed papers, and they're in this like format where they're stuck in place. But they're also actually benefiting from like preprints and from discussions on preprints, where people publish working papers and then get feedback over time from the public, and not just from reviewers at the journal where the paper is submitted. And then they send the like paper, which already has benefited from the public discussion, to the journal.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The one thing that I was going to ask you on this topic of I guess like figuring out interests and kind of giving advice to your younger self and all of this, what would be um, I guess like what are the books or texts or just like things you've come across that have influenced you the most, and I guess that you would kind of recommend to people, uh, like if you had to pick out however many, like five books that and like these would be the books that stay for you for the rest of your life, um, what would you recommend, or blog posts or whatever else it may be?
Right. For books, well, I guess From Eris to Gaia is one of those books, and I mentioned it previously. Aside from that, uh, I don't know. It's a difficult question for me, because I sort of like don't really think in these terms. It doesn't feel like books. Like, books are definitely, some books have definitely been like spiritually influential for me. Uh, because they came at some like points in my life, or because they just, I don't know, I vibed with them a lot, like reading Dostoevsky when when I was young, and like the Notes from the Underground. Okay, I can name Notes from the Underground by Dostoevsky as the book that actually influenced me a lot, and
That's pretty
that I
good.
still reread. Uh, like, yeah, still reread like once a year. Uh, okay, so this is two. Uh, Aside from these two books, uh, I don't know. I'm not sure I can name like more books that actually influenced me. Let me. So I have a list of my
Fair enough.
favorite books on my site, and but even they're like, again, I vibe a lot with them, but I'm not sure how much they like really influenced my like trajectory of what I work on or how I think about life. Honestly, uh, Yeah, I, I, I yeah, I guess. I guess my recommend my third recommendation would be to go to my site, guzey.com, and to look for a page called My Favorite Movies, TV Shows, Books, Podcasts, Music, and Video Games, and check out the books listed there. All of them, all of which I like appreciate greatly, and uh, but none of which I could say that like really influenced me. I guess like one of my favorite books ever I can mention is The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. It's a collection of short war stories, like
I love that
fictionalized
book.
war stories from Vietnam. Yeah, yeah, cool. This is an amazing book, and uh, but yeah, I don't know if it like influenced me uh, per se. So yeah.
Yeah, well, that yeah, I guess there's a lot of great content on that page that you mentioned, and on your site in general. So yeah, I'll link your site and the New Science site in the description so that people can check those out. And also, New Science, you can actually donate to New Science. Um, so yeah, that's something that um, I would encourage people to do, because I think it's quite a
Yeah.
interesting project, and I'm just like I'm really happy that you're doing this, and I look forward to seeing where this goes in the coming years, because I think if done right, things like new science can really shake up the current academic system for the better.
I was just going to say that if you or if you listen through this 3 hour long, almost 3 hour long interview, and uh, enjoyed my thoughts, and you do biology or anything related to biology, feel free to reach out, and I'd love to talk to you, and yeah, and hear your thoughts about new science and academia, and about whatever else is interesting going on in biology and you're thinking about.
Well, it's been a great pleasure having you on. Thanks for coming on to the show, and I will talk to you later.